The toaster was making that grinding noise again at 2 in the morning, which meant I wasn't sleeping anyway when Elise crept through the front door like some guilty teenager. I sat there in our kitchen in Bangor, Maine, screwdriver in hand, watching my wife of 8 years try to explain why her emergency sales meeting had kept her out until this ungodly hour. "Jack, honey, you're up," she whispered, clutching her phone against her chest like it held state secrets. Her lipstick was smudged, her designer dress wrinkled in all the wrong places, and she had that particular look women get when they've been doing something they shouldn't. "Yeah, well, someone has to fix the appliances around here," I muttered, not looking up from the toaster's guts. "How was your meeting with the regional manager?" "Oh, you know how it is. Numbers, projections, the usual boring stuff." She was backing toward the stairs, phone still pressed tight. "I'm exhausted. Going to bed." That's when her phone buzzed. A text message lit up the screen, and even from across the kitchen, I could see the name Brandon. Brandon Holt, the dealership owner's son. The golden boy who'd never worked a real day in his life, but somehow managed to run half the luxury car sales in eastern Maine. "Elise," I said, setting down my screwdriver. "Who's Brandon?" She froze on the third step. "What do you mean?" "Your phone. Brandon just texted you." "Oh, that's just work stuff. Brandon Holt from corporate. Nothing important." But I'd already seen enough of the message preview to know it wasn't about quarterly sales figures. Something about tonight was incredible and next time at my place. I'd been suspicious for months. The late meetings, the new clothes, the way she'd started criticizing everything I did, how I chewed my food, how I fixed cars for a living instead of having some fancy office job, how I wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't making enough money, wasn't enough of anything. She said, "My ex would never have treated me like this, unlike you," I said quietly. "What?" "Nothing. Just remembering something." I stood up, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "You know what I said back then?" Elise was staring at me now, confused and wary. "Jack, what are you talking about?" "I said, I agree. Then I called your ex, explained the situation, and put him on speakerphone. Remember what he said?" Her face went pale. "Jack?" "He said, I knew when to walk away. Don't put up with her. Find someone better. 10 minutes later, you were crying and begging for forgiveness." "That was years ago. Why are you bringing that up now?" I looked at her phone, which had buzzed again. Another message from Brandon. Just wondering if history repeats itself. She clutched the phone tighter and practically ran up the stairs. I heard our bedroom door slam, then the lock click. I sat back down with the toaster, but my hands were shaking too much to work. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of thinking I wasn't good enough, wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't making her happy enough. Well, apparently Brandon Holt was making her plenty happy. I pulled out my own phone and did something I'd never thought I'd do. I opened the app I'd installed 3 months ago when my suspicions first started, the one that cloned her phone data to mine, the one that showed me every text, every call, every GPS location. The messages between Elise and Brandon went back 4 months, hundreds of them. Meeting times, hotel reservations, intimate details that made my stomach turn, plans to meet at the dealership after hours, photos I didn't want to see. And then I found the conversation from 2 weeks ago. Brandon: "When are you going to leave him?" Elise: "Soon. I'm just waiting for the right moment. He's so pathetic, always working on those stupid cars. You're everything he's not." Brandon: "Smart, successful, rich." Elise: "Exactly. Jack will never amount to anything. He doesn't suspect a thing." I sat there in the dark kitchen, staring at those words. He doesn't suspect a thing. The grinding noise from the toaster had stopped. Everything was quiet except for the rain hitting our windows and the sound of my world falling apart. But you know what? For the first time in months, I wasn't angry. I was something else entirely. I was planning. Mickey Torino had been my best friend since high school, and he'd been a cop for 15 years before retiring early due to a bad back and a worse attitude toward bureaucracy. Now, he spent most evenings at the Rusty Anchor, nursing beers and dispensing wisdom to anyone who'd listen. "You look like hell," he said when I walked into the bar the next night. "Feel worse." I slid onto the stool next to him and ordered a whiskey. "Remember when you used to investigate cheating spouses?" Mickey raised an eyebrow. "This about Elise? What gave it away?" "The fact that you look like someone kicked your dog and you don't have a dog." He took a long sip of his beer. "What do you need?" I pulled out my phone and showed him some of the messages. Mickey read them without expression, his cop face sliding into place. 4 months, he said finally. "This Brandon guy, he's the dealership owner's son?" "Yeah. Rich, entitled, never worked for anything in his life. And she's been meeting him where? His office after hours, mostly. Sometimes his penthouse downtown. Her friend Rita covers for her. Tells me Elise is working late on inventory. Mickey nodded slowly. You want to know what I think? That's why I'm here. I think you're handling this better than most guys would. Most guys would have confronted her already, made a scene, maybe done something stupid. The night's still young. No, Jack. You're smarter than that. You're collecting evidence, thinking it through. That's good. He finished his beer and signaled for another. What's your endgame here? I'd been thinking about that all day while I worked on a 1967 Mustang in my garage. My hands stayed busy, but my mind kept circling back to those messages, to the way Elise had looked at me lately, like I was something she'd stepped in. I want her to understand what she's throwing away, I said, and I want everyone to know what kind of person she really is. Public humiliation. Something like that. Mickey grinned, and it wasn't a nice expression. Now you're talking my language. What do you need? Over the next hour, we planned it out. Mickey knew a guy who could get us the security footage from the dealership. I already had access to Elise's phone data, and Mrs. Duffy, our 70-year-old neighbor who knew everyone's business in a 6-block radius, had been dropping hints about seeing Elise's car in strange places at strange times. The key, Mickey said, is making sure everything you do is legal. Embarrassing, yes. Devastating to her reputation, absolutely, but legal. I'm not looking to go to jail over this. Good, because revenge is a dish best served in public, with witnesses and with no criminal charges attached. I finished my whiskey and felt the first real smile I'd had in months spread across my face. You know what the funny thing is? What's that? She always said I was too soft. That I never stood up for myself. Guess she's about to find out how wrong she was. The next morning, I put my plan into action. First stop, Eddie Martinez, the sales manager at a competing dealership, who'd been trying to poach talent from Holt Luxury Motors for years. Eddie was a weasel, but he was a useful weasel. Jack Calhoun, he said when I walked into his office. What brings you to my humble establishment? Information. About what? Brandon Holt and his after-hours activities? Eddie's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Now that's interesting. What kind of information are we talking about? The kind that might be useful to his father. The kind that might show Brandon's been using company property for personal entertainment. And what do you want in return? Security footage. Specifically footage from their service bay cameras that might show what goes on in Brandon's office after closing time. Eddie leaned back in his chair, grinning. You know, I might be able to help with that. Purely in the interest of healthy competition, you understand. Of course. Give me 2 days. 2 days later, I had a thumb drive full of security footage that would make Brandon's father very, very unhappy with his son's professional conduct. The cameras had captured everything. Elise and Brandon in his office, on his desk, against his window overlooking the showroom floor. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. First, I wanted to have a little fun. Elise's pride and joy was her silver Audi A4, a car she'd insisted we couldn't afford but had bought anyway. She washed it every weekend, parked it in the garage, and treated it better than she treated me, which made it the perfect target for my opening move. I waited until she left for one of her late meetings. I knew from her GPS data that she'd be at Brandon's penthouse until at least midnight. Then I went to work. I didn't damage anything. That would have been illegal, and Mickey had drilled into me the importance of staying on the right side of the law. Instead, I got creative. First, I replaced her carefully curated playlist with a custom audio file I'd created using clips from her text messages with Brandon. Her own voice, reading her own words about what a pathetic loser her husband was, set to repeat for 3 hours. Then I programmed her car's security system to activate randomly throughout the night. Not often enough to drain the battery, but often enough to wake up the entire neighborhood. Finally, I disabled the electronic locks on her doors, not permanently, just until she could get them reset at the dealership. I was back in the house, pretending to sleep, when she came home at 12:47 a.m. The car alarm went off at 1:15, and again at 2:33, and again at 4:12. By morning, Mrs. Duffy had called twice to complain about the noise, and Elise was standing in our kitchen looking like she wanted to murder someone. My car's going crazy, she said, still in yesterday's clothes. The alarm keeps going off, the doors won't lock, and the radio's stuck on some weird loop. Sounds like an electrical problem, I said, not looking up from my coffee. You should take it to the dealership. I'm sure Brandon can take a look at it. She froze. What did you say? I said you should take it to the dealership. Where you work. To get it fixed. You said Brandon. I looked up at her with my most innocent expression. Did I? I meant the service department. Unless you think Brandon would personally handle your car troubles. Her face went through several interesting color changes. Jack, we need to talk. About what? About things. About us. What about us, Elise? She sat down across from me, and for a moment she looked like the woman I'd married. Vulnerable, uncertain, almost human. I think we've been growing apart, she said carefully. Have we? Yes, and I think maybe we need some time to figure out what we want. What do you want, Elise? I want... She stopped, looked at her hands. I want to be happy. And you're not happy with me. I don't know. Are you happy with me? I took a sip of my coffee and really looked at her, at the woman who'd been lying to me for 4 months, who'd been planning to leave me for a spoiled rich boy, who thought I was too pathetic to figure out what she was doing. You know what, Elise? I am happy. For the first time in months, I'm genuinely happy. You are? Absolutely. I'm happy because I finally understand what's been wrong with our marriage. What do you mean? I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folder. I mean this. I slid the folder across the table to her. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside were printouts of her text messages with Brandon, photos from the dealership security cameras, GPS logs showing her real locations during her supposed work meetings, bank records showing charges at hotels and restaurants I'd never been to. She went white as paper. Jack, I can explain. Can you? Because I'd love to hear how you explain telling Brandon that I'm pathetic and will never amount to anything, or how you explain planning to leave me for someone with more money. It's not what it looks like. It looks like you've been having an affair for 4 months while making me feel like everything wrong with our marriage was my fault. She was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone who'd been caught and was looking for a way out. You went through my phone, she said. That's illegal. Actually, it's not. The phone is on our joint account, which I pay for, and you left it unlocked on the kitchen counter, but nice try. She stood up, clutching the folder. You can't use this against me. Against you? Elise, I'm not trying to destroy you. I'm trying to save what's left of my self-respect. What do you want? I want you to understand that actions have consequences, and I want you to stop treating me like I'm stupid. I never... You told Brandon I don't suspect a thing. That was 3 days ago. She stared at me, and I could see her mind working, trying to figure out how much I knew, how long I'd known it, what I was planning to do about it. I'm going to stay at Rita's for a while, she said finally. Good idea. Give us both some time to think. She headed for the stairs, then turned back. Jack? Yeah. You'll regret this, all of this. You're making a mistake. I smiled at her, and it felt good. You know what, Elise? I don't think I am. After she left, I called Mickey. How'd it go? He asked. She's staying at Rita's, probably calling Brandon right now to figure out their next move. And you're ready for whatever that is? Mickey, I've been ready for this my whole marriage. I just didn't know it yet. The Holt Luxury Motors annual open house was the social event of the season in our little corner of Maine. Everyone who was anyone showed up to see the new models, drink free champagne, and gossip about their neighbors. This year, I decided to attend. You sure about this? Mickey asked as we walked across the dealership parking lot. Once you do this, there's no going back. I've been thinking about that, I said, straightening my tie. And you know what I realized? I don't want to go back. The showroom was packed with the local elite, all admiring cars they couldn't afford while pretending they were just browsing. Elise was working the crowd in a red dress I'd never seen before, probably bought with money from our joint account to impress Brandon. Brandon himself was holding court near the new Porsche, telling some story that had his audience laughing appreciatively. He was everything I wasn't. Tall, polished, confident in that way that only comes from never having to worry about money. I waited until the crowd was at its thickest, then made my move. Excuse me, I said to the event coordinator, a nervous-looking woman with a clipboard. I'm Jack Calhoun from the local Mechanics Association. We were hoping to make a brief announcement about our scholarship program. Oh, I don't know if we have time for... It'll just take a minute, and it's for a good cause. Before she could object, I was walking toward the small stage they'd set up for presentations. The microphone was already live, and when I tapped it, the feedback got everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment. The crowd turned toward me, including Elise, whose face had gone completely white. My name is Jack Calhoun, and I wanted to take this opportunity to thank some very special people in my life. I could see Brandon pushing through the crowd, probably trying to figure out who I was and why I was on his stage. First, I want to thank my wife, Elise Calhoun, who works here at Holt Motors. I gestured toward her, and a spotlight found her in the crowd. Elise has taught me so much about dedication and hard work. She's been putting in long hours here, sometimes staying until midnight or later. Murmurs from the crowd. A few people nodded approvingly. Yarch, and I want to thank Brandon Holt, the owner's son, who's been so generous with his time and attention. The spotlight found Brandon, who was looking confused but pleased by the recognition. In fact, Brandon and Elise have been working so closely together that they've developed a very special relationship, a partnership built on trust, communication, and shared goals. I could see Elise trying to push through the crowd toward the stage, but there were too many people. I have some audio that really captures the essence of their working relationship. I think you'll find it enlightening. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the sound system. The first voice that came through the speakers was Elise's, reading from one of her text messages. Jack is so pathetic, always working on those stupid cars. You're everything he's not. Smart, successful, rich. Brandon's voice came next. When are you going to leave him? Elise's voice again. Soon. I'm just waiting for the right moment. He'll never amount to anything. He doesn't suspect a thing. The silence stretched for about 5 seconds, and then the crowd exploded. Gasps, whispers, a few nervous laughs. I could see phones coming out, people starting to record. Technical difficulties, I said into the microphone. Sorry about that, folks. Sometimes technology has a mind of its own. I stepped down from the stage and walked calmly through the crowd toward the exit. People were staring, whispering, pointing. Elise was standing frozen near the Porsche, tears streaming down her face. Brandon was red-faced and furious, pushing toward me. He caught up with me in the parking lot. You son of a bastard, he snarled, grabbing my arm. What the hell was that? That was the truth, Brandon. Something you might not be familiar with. You just ruined everything. Elise's career, my reputation. Your reputation? I turned to face him fully. Brandon, your reputation was ruined the moment you decided to sleep with a married woman in your father's office. I just made it public knowledge. He took a swing at me. I saw it coming from a mile away. The guy had probably never been in a real fight in his life. I sidestepped, and his momentum carried him past me. He stumbled, caught himself, and spun around. You're going to pay for this, he said. Am I? I looked around the parking lot where a crowd had gathered to watch our little drama. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're the one who's going to pay. Your father's probably watching the video someone posted on social media right about now. Brandon's face went pale. He looked back at the dealership, where people were still streaming out, all talking excitedly about what they'd just witnessed. This isn't over, he said. You're right, I agreed. It's not. I walked to my truck, got in, and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I could see Brandon standing in the parking lot, surrounded by curious onlookers, looking like a man whose world had just collapsed. Which I suppose it had. Mickey was waiting for me at the Rusty Anchor with a beer and a huge grin. How'd it go? He asked. See for yourself. I showed him my phone, where the video of my little announcement was already going viral on local social media. 300 shares in the last hour. Jesus, Jack, you really did it. I really did. Any regrets? I thought about that for a moment, sipping my beer and watching the video play again, watching Elise's face as her own words came back to haunt her, watching Brandon's confusion turn to horror as he realized what was happening. You know what, Mickey? I don't have a single regret. The next few days were interesting, to say the least. The video of my little announcement had spread beyond social media and made it onto the local news as a human interest story about infidelity in the digital age. Elise had been fired from the dealership. Apparently, Brandon's father took a dim view of employees who conducted personal business on company time and property. Brandon himself had disappeared, probably to his family's vacation home in Bar Harbor to wait for the scandal to blow over. But I wasn't done yet. Prindreich? Duffy knocked on my door Thursday morning with a casserole and a gleam in her eye that meant she had gossip to share. Jack, dear, I hope you're doing all right with all this unpleasantness, she said, bustling into my kitchen without waiting for an invitation. I'm managing, Mrs. Duffy. Thanks for asking. Well, I just wanted you to know that the whole neighborhood is behind you. What that woman did was shameful. Simply shameful. I appreciate that. And I thought you should know that Rita Morrison was by yesterday, packing up Elise's things. Rita was here? Oh, yes. Very upset, she was. Kept muttering about how this was all going to come back on her. Mrs. Duffy leaned in conspiratorially. I think she's worried about her own job at the dealership. Why would she be worried? Well, dear, everyone knows she was covering for Elise. Lying about those late meetings, providing alibis. Mr. Holt Sr. isn't known for his forgiving nature. I filed that information away for later use. Did Rita say where Elise is staying now? Some motel out on Route 1A. The Pine View, I think. Not exactly the luxury she's used to. After Mrs. Duffy left with her empty casserole dish and a full tank of gossip to share with the rest of the neighborhood, I sat down to plan my next move. The Pine View Motel was exactly as depressing as it sounded, a relic from the 1960s that catered to truckers and people down on their luck. I found Elise's car in the parking lot and knocked on the door of room 12. She answered after a long moment, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was unwashed, her eyes were red from crying, and she was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt instead of her usual designer outfits. What do you want, Jack? To talk. We have nothing to talk about. I think we do. Can I come in? She hesitated, then stepped aside. The room was small and dingy, with 2 beds and a broken air conditioner. Her clothes were scattered around like she'd been living out of suitcases. Nice place, I said. Don't what? Don't pretend to care about me now. You destroyed my life. Are you happy? I sat down in the room's single chair and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was still beautiful, even disheveled and desperate. But there was something different about her now. Something harder. Did I destroy your life, Elise? Or did you do that yourself? You humiliated me in front of the entire town. I told the truth in front of the entire town. There's a difference. You recorded my private conversations. Your conversations about leaving me for another man. Yeah, I did. She sat down on the bed across from me, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. What happens now? She asked finally. That depends on you. What do you mean? I mean, you have a choice to make. You can keep pretending you're the victim here, keep blaming me for the consequences of your own actions. Or you can take responsibility for what you did and try to salvage something from this mess. Like what? Like an honest conversation about why our marriage fell apart. Like an acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only problem. She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. I was unhappy, she said finally. I know. You were always working, always focused on your cars and your projects. I felt like I was married to a stranger. So, you decided to have an affair instead of talking to me about it. It wasn't supposed to happen. Brandon was just... He paid attention to me. He made me feel special. And I didn't? Not for a long time, no. I felt a familiar stab of guilt, the same guilt I'd been carrying for months. But this time, I pushed it aside. You know what, Elise? Maybe you're right. Maybe I wasn't the perfect husband. Maybe I did take you for granted sometimes. But you know what I never did? What? I never cheated on you. I never lied to you. I never made plans to leave you for someone else while pretending everything was fine. I know. Do you? Because for the last 4 months, you've been making me feel like I was crazy, like I was paranoid and jealous and not good enough. You had me convinced that everything wrong with our marriage was my fault. It wasn't all your fault. No, it wasn't. But you were perfectly happy to let me think it was. She started crying again, but this time it seemed genuine. Not the manipulative tears she'd shed when she got caught, but real grief for what we'd lost. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know you are. But sorry doesn't fix this, Elise. Sorry doesn't undo 4 months of lies and betrayal. So what now? Do you want a divorce? I think that's probably where we're headed, yes. And you're going to take everything, aren't you? The house, the cars, everything. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where her Audi sat next to a rusted pickup truck. You know what's funny? I said. A month ago, I would have given you anything you wanted just to make you happy. The house, half my business, whatever. But now? Now what? Now I think you're going to have to figure out how to take care of yourself for a change. I headed for the door, then stopped and turned back to her. Oh, and Elise? You might want to find a lawyer. A good one. Why? Because Brandon's not going to be there to catch you when you fall. His father fired him yesterday and cut him off financially. Turns out there were other improprieties besides your affair. Something about embezzling from the company accounts to pay for his lifestyle. Her face went white. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that your knight in shining armor is probably going to be facing criminal charges, and you were his accomplice in at least some of his activities. I didn't know anything about the company credit card he used to pay for your hotel rooms, about the cash advances he took to buy you jewelry. About the fake invoices he submitted for services that were never performed? She stared at me in horror. How do you know all this? Because I've been investigating both of you for weeks. And because Eddie Martinez was very helpful in providing documentation of Brandon's creative accounting methods? You son of a bastard. Maybe, but I'm a son of a bastard who's going to sleep well tonight. I left her there in that dingy motel room and drove home to the house we'd shared for 8 years. It felt different now, cleaner somehow, like a weight had been lifted. Mickey called that evening with an update. Brandon's been arrested, he said without preamble. For what? Embezzlement, fraud, theft. Looks like he's been skimming from the dealership for over a year. Your little stunt at the open house prompted his father to do a full audit of the books. And Elise? She's not being charged with anything criminal, but she's definitely going to be called as a witness. Her name's on a lot of the hotel receipts and restaurant bills. Interesting. Jack, you realize what this means, right? What's that? You won. Completely and totally. Brandon's going to prison, Elise is broke and unemployed, and you're free and clear. I thought about that for a moment, sitting in my kitchen with a beer and the satisfaction of a job well done. You know what, Mickey? I think you're right. 3 weeks later, the annual Bangor Harvest Festival was in full swing. The whole town turned out for it. Families, couples, teenagers looking for something to do on a Saturday night. There were food trucks, a beer garden, local bands, and a stage where the mayor traditionally gave his State of the City address. This year, I had a different kind of address in mind. I'd spent those 3 weeks carefully orchestrating the final act of my revenge. It started with a series of anonymous tips to the local newspaper about Brandon's arrest and the circumstances surrounding it. Then I made sure certain details about Elise's role in the affair found their way to the right gossips in town. By the time the festival rolled around, everyone knew the story, but I wanted to make sure they heard it from me. You're really going to do this? Mickey asked as we walked through the festival grounds. In front of the whole town? In front of the whole town, I confirmed. And you're sure about the timing? Perfect timing. Elise is supposed to meet with her lawyer tonight to discuss the divorce settlement. Brandon's sentencing hearing is next week. And I just found out something very interesting about Rita Morrison. What about Rita? She's been feeding information to the FBI about Brandon's financial crimes. Turns out she was keeping records of everything. Every fake invoice, every unauthorized expense, every cash advance. She's hoping to avoid prosecution by cooperating. Smart girl. Smart enough to save herself. Not smart enough to avoid getting fired when Holt Sr. found out she'd been covering for the affair. We made our way to the main stage, where the mayor was just finishing his speech about economic development and community values. Perfect timing. Ladies and gentlemen, the mayor said, before we get to tonight's entertainment, I'd like to invite anyone who has something to share with the community to come up and speak. I didn't wait for a second invitation. The crowd was bigger than the one at the dealership open house, probably 500 people spread across the town square. I could see familiar faces in the audience, Mrs. Duffy, Eddie Martinez, several of my customers, even some of Elise's former coworkers. And there, near the back of the crowd, was Elise herself. She'd cleaned herself up since our meeting at the motel. New clothes, professional haircut, makeup to hide the stress lines around her eyes. She was probably trying to rebuild her image before the divorce proceedings began. Too bad I was about to tear it down again. Good evening, everyone, I said into the microphone. My name is Jack Calhoun, and I want to talk to you tonight about loyalty. A murmur went through the crowd. Some people recognized me from the dealership incident. Others were just curious about where this was going. 3 weeks ago, many of you saw a video of me speaking at the Holt Motors open house. Some of you probably thought I was just a bitter husband getting revenge on his cheating wife. More murmurs. I could see people pulling out their phones, getting ready to record whatever was about to happen. And you know what? You were right. I was bitter. I was angry. I felt betrayed and humiliated and foolish. I paused, looking out at the crowd. But I was also right. I pulled out a folder. A different one this time, much thicker than the one I'd shown Elise. See, when you discover that your wife is having an affair, you have two choices. You can confront her privately, have a quiet divorce, and try to move on with your life. Or you can dig deeper and find out just how deep the betrayal goes. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. I chose to dig deeper, and what I found was fascinating. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. I found out that my wife's affair wasn't just about attraction or romance. It was about money. Specifically, it was about Brandon Holt's money, which, as it turned out, wasn't really his to begin with. I held up a bank statement. This is a record of deposits made to my wife's personal account over the past 4 months. Deposits totaling over $30,000, all from Brandon Holt, all funded by money he embezzled from his father's business. Gasps from the crowd. I could see Elise pushing through the people, trying to get closer to the stage, her face white with panic. But wait, it gets better. Because my wife wasn't just receiving stolen money, she was helping to steal it. I pulled out another document. These are invoices submitted to Holt Motors for services that were never performed, services supposedly provided by a consulting company owned by... I paused for dramatic effect. Elise Calhoun. The crowd erupted. People were shouting questions, phones were recording, and I could see Elise frantically trying to push her way to the front. Now, you might be wondering why I'm sharing this with all of you instead of just letting the FBI handle it. And the answer is simple. Because this community deserves to know what kind of people have been living among us. I gestured toward where Elise was standing, and a spotlight found her in the crowd. That woman spent 4 months lying to me, stealing from me, and planning to abandon me for a criminal. She made me feel like I was worthless, like I was the problem in our marriage, like I was lucky to have her. Elise had stopped trying to reach the stage. She was just standing there, frozen, as hundreds of people stared at her. But you know what I learned? I learned that sometimes the person who makes you feel worthless is actually the worthless one. I learned that sometimes the person who accuses you of not being good enough is the one who's not good enough. I folded up the documents and put them back in the folder. Brandon Holt is going to prison next week for embezzlement and fraud. My wife is going to be called as a witness in his trial, and possibly charged as an accomplice. And me? I'm going to be just fine. I looked directly at Elise, who was crying now, surrounded by people who were staring at her like she was some kind of exotic animal. You see, Elise always said I was too soft, that I never stood up for myself, never fought for what I wanted. I smiled, and I knew it wasn't a nice smile. Guess she was wrong about that, too. I stepped away from the microphone and walked down from the stage. The crowd parted to let me through, and I could hear the buzz of conversation starting up behind me. Elise tried to intercept me as I reached the edge of the square. "Jack, please," she said, grabbing my arm. "You don't understand. I never meant for any of this to happen." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then up at her face. She was beautiful, even desperate and crying, but she wasn't my problem anymore. "You know what, Elise? I believe you. I don't think you meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen, and now you have to live with the consequences. They're going to arrest me. Maybe. Or maybe you'll get lucky, and they'll just make you testify against Brandon. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. Please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't change anything." I gently removed her hand from my arm and started walking away. "Jack!" she called after me. "What am I supposed to do now?" I stopped and turned back to her one last time. "You're supposed to figure it out yourself. You're a strong, independent woman, right? That's what you always told me. So be strong and independent." I walked away from her, through the crowd of people who were still buzzing about what they'd just witnessed. Some of them nodded at me approvingly, others just stared. Mickey was waiting for me at the edge of the festival grounds with 2 beers and a huge grin. "Well," he said, handing me a beer, "that was something." "That was everything," I corrected. "Any regrets?" I looked back at the festival, where Elise was still standing in the middle of the crowd, looking lost and alone. For just a moment, I felt a twinge of something. Not regret exactly, but maybe sadness for what we'd once had. Then I remembered the text messages, the lies, the months of being made to feel like I wasn't good enough. "No regrets," I said, and meant it. We walked to Mickey's truck and drove to the Rusty Anchor, where the bartender bought us around and half the regulars wanted to hear the story firsthand. I told it with embellishments, and by closing time it had become local legend. 2 days later, Elise was arrested as an accessory to Brandon's embezzlement scheme. She made bail, but her lawyer advised her to plead guilty in exchange for probation and restitution. The divorce was finalized a month after that. She got nothing. Our prenup, which she'd insisted on when we got married, protected my business and most of our assets. The house, the garage, everything I'd built stayed with me. Brandon got 3 years in federal prison and an order to pay back everything he'd stolen, plus penalties. His father disowned him publicly and sold the dealership to a competitor from Portland. Rita Morrison testified for the prosecution and avoided jail time, but she had to leave town once the threats started. Apparently, many people had lost money when the dealership shut down and blamed her for not speaking out sooner. As for me, I kept fixing cars, kept living in our house, kept going to the Rusty Anchor with Mickey. But everything was different now. Better. People treated me with respect instead of pity. Women smiled at me instead of looking through me. I'd gone from being the guy whose wife was cheating on him to being the guy who'd outsmarted the cheaters and made them pay. 6 months after the festival, I was working late in my garage when someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find a woman I didn't recognize, mid-30s, pretty, wearing jeans and a sweater that suggested she worked with her hands. "Are you Jack Calhoun?" she asked. "Depends who's asking." "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I just moved here from Boston. I heard you do restoration work on classic cars." "I do." "I have a 1969 Camaro that needs some attention. Would you be interested in taking a look at it?" I stepped outside and saw the car parked in my driveway. It was a mess, rust, dents, primer patches, but it had good bones. "She's been in my family for 20 years, Sarah said. "My dad always meant to restore her, but he never got around to it before he died." "What are you looking to do with her?" "Make her beautiful again. Make her something to be proud of." I walked around the car, checking the frame, the engine bay, the interior. It would be a lot of work, but it would be worth it. "I can do that," I said. "What will it cost?" I quoted her a fair price, and she didn't even flinch. "When can you start?" "Tomorrow, if you want." She smiled, and it was a real smile, not the calculating expression I'd gotten used to from Elise. "I want," she said. As I watched her drive away in her daily driver, a practical Honda that was clean and well-maintained, I realized something. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to tomorrow. I went back into the garage and started planning the Camaro restoration. It would take months, maybe a year, but when I was done, it would be something special, something worth the time and effort, something honest. I was still working when Mickey showed up with a six-pack and the latest gossip from town. "Heard Elise is moving to Florida," he said, settling into the lawn chair I kept in the garage for visitors. "Good for her. Word is she's got a job at some insurance company down there, claims adjusting or something. She always was good with numbers. You're not curious about what she's doing?" I looked up from the carburetor I was rebuilding. "Mickey, I spent 8 years being curious about what Elise was doing. I'm done being curious about Elise." "Fair enough." He opened 2 beers and handed me one. "So what's next for Jack Calhoun?" "Next is I finish this carburetor, then I start on that Camaro tomorrow. After that, who knows? You ever think about dating again?" "Maybe. When I'm ready." "And when will that be?" I took a sip of my beer and thought about it. About Sarah's smile, about the way she'd looked at her father's car with love instead of calculation, about the possibility of finding someone who saw potential instead of problems. "Soon," I said. "Maybe sooner than I thought." Mickey grinned. "Now that's what I like to hear." We sat there in comfortable silence, drinking our beers and listening to the rain on the garage roof. Outside, the town was settling in for the night, full of people with their own stories, their own problems, their own possibilities. But inside my garage, surrounded by the tools of my trade and the satisfaction of work well done, I was exactly where I wanted to be. For the first time in years, I was home.